however, acquitted of that charge too. You all know," he continued, addressing the entire assemblage, "the reason for which this young hero cut down that monster of political iniquity, S. Austin Maverick. On the very morning of his justly merited death, Austin Maverick, using the powers of his political influence, rammed through the Finance and Revenue Committee a bill entitled An Act for the Taxing of Personal Incomes and for the Levying of a Withholding Tax. Fellow citizens, words fail me to express my horror of this diabolic proposition, this proposed instrument of tyrannical extortion, borrowed from the dark ages of the 20th century. Why, if this young nobleman had not taken his blade in hand, I'd have killed the son of a bitch myself." He leaned forward, extending the belt and holsters to the defendant. "I therefore restore to you your weapons, taken from you when, in compliance with the law, you were formally arrested. Buckle them on, and assuming your weapons again, go forth from this court a free man, Wilbur Whately, and take with you that machete with which you vindicated the liberties and rights of all New Texans. Bear it reverently to your home, hang it among your lares and penates, cherish it, and dying, mention it within your will, bequeathing it as a rich legacy unto your issue. Court adjourned. Next session, 0900 tomorrow. For Christ's sake, let's get out of here before the barbecue's over." Some of the spectators, drooling for barbecued super cow, began crowding and jostling toward the exits. More of them were pushing to the front of the courtroom, cheering and waving their hip flasks. The prosecution and about half of the friends of the court hastily left by a side door, probably to issue statements disassociating themselves from the deceased Maverick. "So, that's the court that's going to try the men who killed Ambassador Cumshaw," I commented, as Gale and I went out. "Why, the purpose of that court seems to be to acquit murderers." "Murderers?" She was indignant. "That wasn't murder. He just killed a politician. All the court could do was determine whether or not the politician needed it, and while I never heard about Maverick's income tax proposition, I can't see how they could have brought in any other kind of verdict. Of all the outrageous things—" I was thoughtfully silent as we went out into the plaza, which was still a riot of noise and polychromatic costumes, and my thoughts were as weltered as the scene before me. Apparently, on New Texas, killing a politician wasn't regarded as malum in se, and was malum prohibitorum only to the extent that what happened to the politician was in excess of what he deserved. I began to understand why Palm was such a scared rabbit, why Hutchinson had that hunted look and kept his hands always within inches of his pistols. I began to feel more pity than contempt for Thromley, too. He's been on this planet too long, and he should never have been sent here in the first place. I'll rotate him home as soon as possible. Then the full meaning of what I had seen finally got through to me. If they were going to try the killers of Cumshaw in that court, that meant that on New Texas foreign diplomats were regarded as practicing politicians. That made me a practicing politician too. And that's why, when we got back to the vicinity of the bandstand, I had my right hand close to my pistol, with my thumb on the inconspicuous little spot of silver inlay that operated the secret holster mechanism. I saw Hutchinson and Palm and Thromley ahead. With them was a newcomer, a portly, ruddy-faced gentleman with a white mustache and goatee, dressed in a white suit. Gale broke away from me and ran toward him. This, I thought, would be her father. Now I would be introduced and find out just what her last name was. I followed, more slowly, and saw a waiter with a wheeled serving table move in behind the group which he had joined. So I saw what none of them did. The waiter suddenly reversed his long carving knife and poised himself for a blow at President Hutchinson's back. I simply pressed the little silver stud on my belt. The Krupp Tata popped obediently out of the holster into my open hand. I thumbed off the safety and swung up. When my sights closed on the rising hand that held the knife, I fired. Hadi Ringo, who had been holding a sandwich with one hand and a drink with the other, dropped both and jumped on the man whose hand I had smashed. A couple of Rangers closed in and grabbed him also. The group around President Hutchinson had all turned and were staring from me to the man I had shot, and from him to the knife with the broken handle lying on the ground. Hutchinson spoke first. "Well, Mr. Ambassador, my government thanks your government. That was nice shooting." "Hey, you been holding out on me," Hadi accused. "I never knew you was that kind of gunfighter." "There's a new wrinkle," the man with the white goatee said. "We'll have to screen the help at these affairs a little more closely." He turned to me. "Mr. Ambassador, New Texas owes you a great deal for saving the President's life. If you'll get that pistol out of your hand, I'd be proud to shake it, sir." I holstered my automatic and took his hand. Gale was saying, "Stephen, this is my father," and at the same time Palm, the Secretary of State, was doing it more formally. "Ambassador Silk, may I present one of our leading citizens and large ranchers, Colonel Andrew Jackson Hickok." Dumbarton Oaks had taught me how to maintain the proper diplomat's unchanging expression. Drinking super bourbon had been a postgraduate course. I needed that training as I finally learned Gale's last name. Chapter 6. It was early evening before we finally managed to get away from the barbecue. Thrombley had called the embassy and told them not to wait dinner for us, so the staff had finished eating and were relaxing in the patio when our car came in through the street gate. Stonehenge and another man came over to meet us as we got out, a man I hadn't met before. He was a little fellow, half Latin, half Oriental, in new Texas costume, and wearing a pair of pistols like mine, in State Department Special Services holsters. He didn't look like a Dumbarton Oaks product. I thought he was more likely an alumnus of some private detective agency. "Mr. Francisco Peros, our intelligence man," Stonehenge introduced him. "Sorry, I wasn't here when you arrived, Mr. Silk," Peros said. "Out checking on some things. But I saw that bit of shooting on the telecast screen in a bar over town. You know, there was a camera right over the bandstand that caught the whole thing. You and Miss Hickok coming toward the President and his party. Miss Hickok running forward to her father. The waiter going up behind Hutchinson with the knife, and then that beautiful draw and snapshot. They ran it again a couple of times on the half-hourly newscast. Everybody in New Austin, maybe on New Texas, is talking about it now." "Yes, indeed, sir," Gomez, the embassy secretary, said, joining us. "You've made yourself more popular in the 8 hours since you landed than poor Mr. Cumshaw had been able to do in the 10 years he spent here. But I'm afraid, sir, you've given me a good deal of work, answering your fan mail." He went over and sat down at one of the big tables under the arches at the side of the patio. "Well, that's all to the good," I said. "I'm going to need a lot of local goodwill in the next few weeks. No thanks, Mr. Peros," I added, as the intelligence man picked up a bottle and made to pour for me. "I've been practically swimming in super bourbon all afternoon. A little black coffee, if you don't mind. And now, gentlemen, if you'll all be seated, we'll see what has to be done." "A council of war, in effect, Mr. Ambassador?" Stonehenge inquired. "Let's call it a council to estimate the situation. But I'll have to find out from you first exactly what the situation here is." Thrombley stirred uneasily. "But, sir, I confess that I don't understand. Your briefing on Luna was practically non-existent. I had a total of 6 hours to get aboard ship, from the moment I was notified that I had been appointed to this embassy." "Incredible," Thrombley murmured. I wondered what he'd say if I told him that I thought it was deliberate. "Naturally, I spent some time on the ship reading up on this planet, but I know practically nothing about what's been going on here in, say, the last year.